The cold wind cut through the air like a thin blade. It was the winter of 1930, and the small Asheville train station, deep in Illinois, slept beneath a mist that seemed never to lift. Amid the distant sound of locomotives and the smell of burning coal, a girl stood still, clutching a torn piece of cloth, the last embrace left to her by her mother. Her name was Evelyn Grace. She was 13, with deep brown eyes and messy, straw-colored hair that the wind refused to leave alone. She wore a coat far too large for her, with frayed elbows and mismatched buttons. In her hand, she held something that at that moment felt like a cruel joke, a single crumpled dollar. Her mother had left her there less than an hour ago, promising to return as soon as she found work in the big city. Evelyn believed her, the way only a child can believe. But the promise vanished with the steam of the last departing train. She waited, first standing, watching every passenger who arrived, then sitting on a wooden bench that creaked like a warning of abandonment. When the clock struck 2 in the afternoon, she was still waiting. At 3, the sun began to hide. At 4, the cold bit her fingers. By 5, she understood. No one was coming back. A station worker, his face hidden beneath a grease-stained cap, approached and asked if she had somewhere to go. Evelyn shook her head. He sighed, muttered something about orphans and hard times, and went back inside. She remained alone. As the shadows of night took over the platform, Evelyn pulled the dollar from her pocket and held it up to the dim light of the lamp. It was the saddest bill in the world, dirty, folded, with Washington's face nearly erased. Yet somehow, that piece of paper seemed to pulse, as if whispering, "This isn't the end." She tucked the bill back into her coat, pressing it to her chest. Then she saw him. A man stumbling along the platform, an old street vendor with a box slung around his neck, shouting between coughs, "Cigarettes! Cheap cigarettes! 3 for $1." Evelyn watched him until he disappeared around the corner. Then something sparked inside her. A single, clear thought. 3 for $1. That night, she slept behind an abandoned train car, clutching the bill, dreaming of something she couldn't yet name. But when dawn broke and the first engines hissed to life on the tracks, she was no longer the same girl. The abandonment had turned into an idea. And every great story begins that way, with pain and a single dollar. Morning came with the sound of iron and steam. Locomotives woke, and the station filled again with smoke and noise. Evelyn rose from the corner where she had slept, her body stiff from the cold, her clothes covered in dust. The night had been merciless. Hunger gnawed at her belly, and every step carried the weight of her loneliness. She wandered among the tracks, watching men unload cargo, men covered in soot, exhausted but alive. Each of them seemed to have a purpose, something she lacked. The smell of burnt coal mixed with the scent of fresh bread from across the street, torturing her empty stomach. At 13, Evelyn learned what despair truly was. Not the fear of death, but the fear of staying alive without knowing what to do. She washed her face in the cracked pipe of the station restroom and stared at her reflection in a broken mirror. The face that stared back was no longer a child's. It was the face of someone time had forced to grow up too soon. Then the thought returned. Sharp, insistent, almost like a revelation. The cigarette seller. The raspy voice shouting through the platform the day before. 3 for $1. Evelyn remembered the box around the man's neck, the rush of hands reaching out, the jingle of coins like little promises. It seemed simple and impossible, but it was an idea. And ideas are the first form of wealth. With the single dollar she owned, she walked to a small shop near the station. The wooden floor creaked beneath her hesitant steps. The owner eyed her with suspicion, but eventually sold her a pack of cigarettes. The dollar vanished from her hand, and with it, the last tie to her past. For a moment, it felt like she had traded her mother's memory for a handful of smoke and paper. But when she held that pack, something changed. For the first time, she possessed something she could transform. Back at the station, she studied the crowd, men rushing to catch trains, workers killing time, travelers seeking distraction. Then, with the timid courage of someone stepping out of childhood, she began to sell. No one looked. No one answered. But little by little, hands began to reach out. A coin here, another there. And the metallic sound of money falling into her palm became music. By sunset, she had sold the entire pack. With the profit, she bought another. Then 2. Then 5. The hours passed, and the morning cold turned into the warmth of discovery. The world might be cruel, but it had cracks, and she had just found one. That night, sitting again on the wooden bench, she counted her coins one by one. $4.60. It wasn't much, but it was hers. The same wind that once froze her now seemed to push her forward. Evelyn understood that the train she had waited for would never come. But it no longer mattered. Her destination wasn't on the tracks. It was in her own hands. Days turned into weeks. The girl at the station was no longer a mystery. She was part of the scenery. Workers greeted her. Passengers recognized her face. She had learned how to move through the crowd like a shadow, silent but constant. She knew when to approach, when to retreat, and how to read a stranger's eyes. Patience had become her secret trade. Her coins began to accumulate in small amounts, hidden inside an old tin box beneath a loose plank near the tracks. Every night she returned there, counting her earnings with the reverence of prayer. That metallic rhythm of coins dropping was like the heartbeat of a new life forming inside her. Soon she expanded beyond cigarettes, selling candy, matches, and later coffee to the railroad workers. She watched, listened, and absorbed the rules of survival. Evelyn had discovered an invisible truth. Those who watch the world closely learn how to bargain with it. But money always comes with shadows. Some adults looked at her with curiosity, others with annoyance. One morning, a station guard tried to drive her away, saying it wasn't a place for beggars or orphans. She said nothing. The next day, she was back. Same place, same eyes. The station was her only home. Winter deepened, and the nights grew longer. She slept near abandoned cars, using old newspapers as blankets. Her hands cracked from the cold, but she kept working. With her savings, she bought a worn wool hat and a second-hand coat, her first purchase made entirely from her own effort. When she caught her reflection in a shop window, she barely recognized herself. The abandoned child had vanished. In her place stood a young woman who understood the power of beginning again. Hope, however, always demands a price. Evelyn was about to pay it. One night, as the wind howled through the station, she went to her hiding place to store the day's coins. When she lifted the board, she found nothing. The tin box was gone. She froze, then knelt, digging through the dirt with trembling hands. Nothing, not a single coin. Weeks of effort had vanished, stolen, perhaps by a worker, perhaps by fate itself. She didn't cry. She sat by the tracks, staring into the distance. Inside her, something cracked, but something else began to form. A cold, silent determination. They can take what I have, but never what I am. At dawn, she returned to work. No smile, No tears, just purpose. For the first time, those who passed her didn't see a child selling cigarettes. They saw a survivor. That winter seemed endless. The mornings came white with frost, the silence heavy. Evelyn stayed at her post, her pale face marked by wind and work. The small girl of the station had become a quiet legend. Some said she was an orphan, others a runaway. Some whispered she never slept, a ghost with the scent of smoke and coal. Then, one morning, a late train arrived through the fog. From it stepped a tall man in a dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat that hid most of his face. He carried a leather briefcase and walked with the assurance of someone who knew exactly where he was going. Evelyn watched him from afar. There was something about him, not his wealth or his posture, but his eyes. They held the look of a man who had seen the abyss and learned to make peace with it. He returned the next day, and the day after. Always the same bench, the same notebook, the same silence. For a week, he sat there, as if waiting for someone who would never come. One afternoon, as the snow began to fall, he dropped a coin. Evelyn rushed to grab it before it rolled onto the tracks. When she looked up, he was staring at her. No emotion, just curiosity. He nodded once, a small gesture that carried weight. From that day on, the man bought cigarettes from her, always overpaying, never speaking. The strangers around them built stories. A failed businessman, a widower, a ghost of the railway. Evelyn didn't care. For the first time since her mother left, someone saw her. Not a beggar, not a vendor, a person. Then, suddenly, he was gone. Days passed, and the bench stayed empty. Until one night, she found an envelope tucked beneath a stone where he used to sit. Inside was a $10 bill and a note. Don't wait for the train. Build your own. Evelyn read it over and over. She didn't know who he was, but she understood the message. It wasn't about money. It was about destiny. The next morning, she used the money to expand her trade. More goods, more variety. Soon, she was known as the Girl of the Rails. The station buzzed with her presence. The winter remained merciless, but within her, something unstoppable had begun. Years passed, and the station became her kingdom. She was no longer a wandering child, but a skilled merchant. She sold everything from candy to newspapers, managing her small business with precision. Her name spread, the girl who made money multiply. But the same attention that brings opportunity also brings envy. At 16, Evelyn learned that success makes you a target. A worker named Henry Malone, rough and cunning, began watching her too closely. His interest wasn't admiration, it was greed. One spring afternoon, Evelyn returned to find her stall destroyed, her goods torn apart, her savings gone. No one looked, no one cared. The world moved on. She didn't cry. She sat among the ruins, her fists tight with fury. She knew who had done it. She had no power to confront him, but she had something stronger. Resolve. She rebuilt. Smarter this time. She hid her money in several places, changed routines, trusted no one. Every scar became a lesson. The years hardened her into steel. She learned that money is like fire. It can warm or burn. The more you hold it, the more it scorches. But she also learned that resilience is priceless. By 32, Evelyn Grace was no longer the girl at the station. She was the owner of it. Her company, E. Grace Co., had turned into a regional trading network. Where once there was loneliness, now there was movement, commerce, and people. Yet she never left Asheville. She built her office above the tracks, with wide windows and the sound of trains below. A reminder of where it all began. On the wall hung the same station clock, forever stopped at 5 o'clock, the hour she realized her mother wasn't coming back. She had money, power, respect, but none of it sounded like the clink of her first few coins. Success, she discovered, doesn't echo like hope. One night, she walked through the quiet platform. The air still smelled of iron and rain. She saw the tracks glowing faintly under the lantern light and thought of the man with the hat, the winters, the hunger. Then she noticed a match burning under a bench, a small flame eating through a scrap of paper. She bent down and blew it out. The ashes stayed. Ashes, proof that something once existed. The next morning, she built something new, not for herself, but for others. A shelter for the children of the workers. She called them the Rail Kids. She fed them, clothed them, taught them to write, to count, to dream. She wanted them to know early what she had learned late. Freedom comes from knowledge, not money. Her empire was made not of gold, but of purpose. Yet, some nights, she still felt the weight of that first dollar in her coat pocket, the one her mother had left behind. In her office, on a dark wooden shelf, sat a small glass frame. Inside, the same wrinkled, faded bill. A handwritten note beneath it read, "The first and the last. What was given to me and what I never spent." Evelyn Grace, the girl of the station, had become what destiny demanded. A woman forged in fire, shaped by loss, and risen from the ashes. Decades later, the world had changed. The station was modern, electric, gleaming. The smell of coal was gone, but one small museum preserved what history refused to forget. Among lanterns and uniforms, at the center of the main room, a single glass case glowed under soft light. Inside lay a $1 bill, old, wrinkled, almost colorless. A small plaque read, "Donated by Evelyn Grace, founder of E. Grace Co., the first woman to lead a railway trading network in the state. She turned $1 into destiny." Visitors passed by, reading, moving on. But some lingered, drawn to that fragile relic. There was something about it. A quiet energy. A story too deep to be told. Evelyn was long gone. She died one spring morning at 68, watching the tracks through her window, in the house she built beside the station. She died as she lived, in motion, without luxury, without applause, but in peace. Among her belongings, they found a notebook filled with calculations, notes, and thoughts. On the last page, written in firm, steady handwriting, a single line, "Life taught me that nothing is ever too small when it starts from nothing." And it was true. The dollar in the glass case wasn't about money. It was about hope. The spark that burns in those who refuse to give up, even when everything else is gone. Few remember her full name today, but everyone who stops in front of that dollar feels something. A chill, a whisper, a memory. Because deep down, every person carries a little piece of their own beginning. A dream that seemed impossible. A promise made to the wind. A train that never came. And so, time keeps running along the rails. But the dollar remains, still, silent, eternal. The living memory of a girl who learned how to turn nothing into everything.